Returning to school as an adult is an exciting and daunting prospect. There are possibilities for personal growth, renewed intellectual stimulation, expanded networks of friends and colleagues, and the welcome increase of earning potential. Adult education also presents its share of challenges: learning difficulties, self-esteem issues, work-family balance, and temporary financial insecurity. Researchers in adult education have identified common characteristics of people who are entering an education program in their middle and later years. They need to feel in control of their new endeavor, to feel a validation of prior experience with new information. They want to feel that the desire to learn is coming from within, and that this new information has pragmatic application to their real-life goals. Many adult learners are motivated by their past experience to improve their quality of life, increase their contentment at work, and enhance their self-esteem and self-reliance. I am an adult learner. My name is Tim. I'm 38 years old. I'm a high school graduate, but just barely. I was prodigious in artistic pursuits in my youth, but a resounding failure in math and science. Music made sense to me. The passion and the experimentation. It allowed me to explore the world and myself when I was a gawkish small-town farm boy. At school, I was the first with my hand in the air when questioned about the emotional weight of a plagal cadence or the various ways to resolve a diminished seventh chord. But I was the least interested when quizzed about the Pythagorean theorem or the table of elements. My attendance record for music class was on time and at attention, but for math and science, I was essentially absent. Academic pursuits seemed dry and lifeless to me. I eventually graduated from high school, but with marks no mother was proud of, and no university would consider as acceptable for entry to their prestigious institutions. I took on a workman attitude to life and was grateful for whatever economic opportunity came my way. I never lost my zeal for music. I continued to compose and perform my musical ideas, but the reality of bills and rent dictated my decisions for years. As circumstance goes, I found myself 20 years later in a position to reconstruct my life. I considered the economy of the area I had chosen to settle in and decided upon a mechanical engineering diploma as a rational career direction. I felt motivated by renewed possibilities, but I knew I was bound to be confronted by my old nemeses, math and science. So herein lies the question: how does a guy like me adapt my learning tendencies to succeed in an academic environment with challenging new information as an adult learner? Intelligence has been widely examined in psychology and education sciences for decades. Much of the discussion has involved the use of standardized tests to determine human intellectual capacity. For a standardized test of intelligence to be relevant, a standardized definition of intelligence is needed. The American Psychological Association defines intelligence as the ability to derive information, learn from experience, adapt to the environment, understand and correctly utilize thought and reason. The same organization, however, conceded the following about a conclusive definition of intelligence. Although considerable clarity has been achieved in some areas, no such conceptualization has yet answered all the important questions, and none commands universal assent. Indeed, when 24 prominent theorists were recently asked to define intelligence, they gave 24 somewhat different definitions. Standardized IQ tests are a reliable tool to measure competence in the reasoning and verbal skills that indicate classical academic success. But they fail to measure other characteristics, like conscientiousness and openness, which have also been identified as predictors of success. In 1983, developmental psychologist Howard Gardner released a book called Frames of Mind: The Theory of Multiple Intelligences. In it, he dismissed the notion of a single idea of intelligence, arguing instead that humans have a combination of 8 different types of intelligences. He listed these as logical, spatial, kinesthetic, linguistic, naturalistic, interpersonal, intrapersonal, and musical, later adding existential intelligence as a 9th. These intelligences exist on a spectrum, each person possessing various levels of each. Gardner maintained that each of these are as important as the others, and explained that in different cultures, certain intelligences are prized more, as the skills that accompany them are more important to the survival of its people. He believed people could use the capacities to which they were naturally inclined as a gateway to competence in other, more personally challenging intellectual pursuits. His book was met with enthusiastic praise and skepticism. Proponents were eager to explore a revolutionary new concept for learning and teaching. Critics pointed to a lack of rigorous testing and empirical data to support the fundamental claims of his theory. Nevertheless, many educators saw great potential in adapting Gardner's theories to their teaching methods, and curricula was developed in many school boards incorporating his ideas. The theory of multiple intelligences describes musical intelligence as skill in performing, composing, and appreciating music, and an acute awareness of its rhythm, tone, form, and pattern. So, the question remains, how does an adult learner like myself, with musical intelligence, but otherwise lacking in the classical academic intelligences, adapt his learning tendencies to succeed in a new academic challenge? How do I apply my existing talents to become a qualified mechanical engineer? An engineering program requires its students to comprehend complex mathematical concepts. For a building to be held up by its foundation, or a boiler to be safe under intense pressure, an engineer must understand the underlying equations. On paper, these can appear overwhelming. But if the musically inclined student considers the complex equations that govern the structure of music, they would see some relation. Music is composed of intricate chordal and rhythm structures, frequencies, and intervals. When considered in comparison, these equations aren't so different. They simply build and maintain different structures. Howard Gardner explains in his book that musical and linguistic intelligences are parallel to each other. Musicians typically have a predilection for language, and when learning a new skill, there will be a new language of the trade, and it is beneficial to thoroughly understand the terminology used to describe it. Musicians have a deep connection to kinesthetic intelligence, as their bodies are used to create the sounds that come from the instruments and voices. First, They must learn to properly hold the instruments and position their bodies correctly. Then they use their hands to manipulate valves and strings and keys in their correct position to play the right chords and notes. This intelligence is relatable to mechanical engineering in the way that an engineer correctly manipulates their tools and bodies while building and maintaining in a mechanical environment. When composing or performing, the musician is in a sense forming a structure. First, they create a layout of measurements, then combine various structural components and instruments to build a composition, a sort of auditory formation. When building a power plant or manufacturing facility, mechanical engineers are doing the same. Drafting blueprints, using tools and structural components to achieve their plans. Working with others is an integral part of creating and performing music. The success of a performance is reliant on the collective abilities of the group. The well-being of the group is maintained with consistent, open, and empathetic communication. This type of interpersonal intelligence is key in an engineering environment where oftentimes open communication, listening, and teamwork could mean life or death. Mechanical environments are noisy places, and the pitch, timbre, or repetition of sounds are heavily relied upon to determine the functionality of machines and components. A worn bearing or a piston with no lubrication will make a distinct sound that an engineer must recognize immediately before the equipment fails. Those gifted with musical intelligence are very qualified to notice these often subtle changes. Howard Gardner's theories have given new light to the way we think about intelligence. The idea that it only inhabits a narrow domain is no longer the generally accepted view. For my purposes, I will continue to find ways to apply my intrinsic musical intelligence to better understand and succeed in my new pursuit.